Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Confidence is knowing you're ready to handle whatever comes your way. That's what it feels like to take on your workday with Cintas. They make sure your AEDs are up to date, your fire extinguishers are tested and inspected, your floor mats are cleaned and delivered, and your workwear looks good, feels good, and is freshly laundered with the Cintas Apparel Plus program. So are you ready to take on today? Visit Cintas.com.
Oh, I'm ready!
And get ready for the workday.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 517, The Black Hole That Is Stalingrad. Last time, the invaders had penetrated into southern and northern Stalingrad, while also trying to take the height just northwest of the city. This last one, though, remained unclaimed by both sides. Still, they both had men on opposite sides of its base. As for the city itself, the center was holding, but just barely. Now it was time for the Germans and the Russians to reassess and alter their plans, and this would shape the next phase of the battle. Problem was, the top level of German command came to different conclusions after their latest reassessments. To start, just days after the Germans entered Stalingrad proper, General Zhukov on September 18th had ordered a counterattack just north of the city. It had failed miserably, like his first counterattack when the Axis first entered the city. And here again, the German 16th Panzer Division had shattered this counterattack in less than a day. It should have been another feather in the cap of General von Wittersheim, 16th Panzer's commander, but instead it got him to thinking. The area that the Axis controlled leading to Stalingrad was like an imperfect letter V turned on its side, with the point just touching the city. So when Wittersheim fought off Zhukov's attack, though he won, there wasn't much room for him to maneuver, being near to the point as he was. And when it came to dealing with the Soviet T-34 tanks, the Germans liked room enough to employ their artillery from a relatively safe distance. That wasn't allowed here, given the lack of space. Moreover, the Russians had been able to fire artillery from both sides of the Axis corridor during this battle. And this shelling had taken place the entire time, as Wittersheim had been regrouping or reforming his forces for the next attack. So his idea, sent to General Paulus, the ranking officer of Army Group B, was to pull his panzers out and replace them with infantry and artillery, freeing up the panzers for flanking attacks, rather than pitting them against the T-34s. He also requested that the Axis corridor to Stalingrad be widened with large flanking attacks, done by someone else. But Paulus took one look at this request and screamed that Wittersheim was suffering from defeatism and recommended to Hitler that he be relieved of command. Not only did Hitler agree, but eventually, Wittersheim was completely dismissed from the army. Yet given what was about to happen around Stalingrad, sometimes bad news in the short term turns out to be great news in the long run. Another German general starting to worry about the shape of the battle for Stalingrad was General Victor von Schwelder, commander of the 4th Panzer Corps, operating to the south of the city. And his concern was also based in reality. Namely, if they kept losing panzers while fighting in the city, when the Soviets eventually, and they would, counterattack the Axis wedge, the Germans, would not have enough panzers to hold them back. No, let the infantry, backed by artillery and Stuka attacks, take the city. Hold the panzers for the fight after this fight. This report was also sent to Paulus, who, outraged, got Hitler's permission to sack him as well. And there would be other officers to lose their position after pointing out potential problems. And as the expression, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, is universal, small Soviet units kept hitting the Italian part of the line just west-northwest of Stalingrad. As this could unravel the entire battle for Stalingrad, General Gunther Blumentritt at OKH, in charge of supplies and transportation on the Eastern Front, was sent to check on this section of the line. First, he found the Italian division had been pushed back by a Soviet battalion, meaning no more than 1,000 men, and probably nowhere near that number. Blumentritt wasted no time. He pulled the German Alpine Division and parts of the 6th German Division forward to fill in the hole that was created. But it was the next part of Blumentritt's report that was to set off a powder keg in high command. Being a logistics expert, he noticed that the supporting railheads were 200 kilometers or 124 miles away from this front, and as this was a steppe, there were no to few trees to build defensive works to get through the winter. And considering what had happened last winter, this could spell disaster for Army Group B. Further, the German divisions themselves were holding fronts 50 or 60 kilometers, 31 or 37 miles long, again with no trenches. That basically, given all this, they would not survive a massive winter counterattack. General Halder, Chief of Staff of the Army High Command, or OKH, read Blumentritt's report and saw the danger himself. He went to Hitler and suggested stopping the attack on Stalingrad just before winter proper set in. This lit the fuse. As September ended, Halder and Hitler went round and round, not only not agreeing, but each time raising their voices. Soon after, Halder told Hitler that he refused to take responsibility for continuing the attack as winter approached, and Hitler agreed. Halder was dismissed and replaced by General Kurt Zeitzler. To Hitler's thinking, he had been right last winter when he declared not a single step back, and though he had lost men and equipment, his loss of territory had stopped. So he assumed he was correct here as well. But there had been a few changes. To name two, the Soviets had had almost a year to reorganize their forces overall, and two, the supplies of Lend-Lease. As for General Halder, he was placed in what was called the Führer Reserve. He was in a holding pattern, if you will, awaiting his next assignment. But there would be no next assignment for him. When the war ended, he was still waiting. As for Kurt Zeitzler, the new Chief of Staff of the OKH, he had been the Chief of Staff for Kleist and Rundstedt, but time would show he was a solid tactician versus Halder's thorough grasp of strategy. Two very different worldviews. And the first thing that Hitler wanted his new Chief of Staff to do was to plan on how to keep the fight going for Stalingrad through the winter. And to help his new chief, Der Führer told Zeitzler that he believed if Soviet Russia was to launch a major winter offensive, it would be directed not here, but at Army Group Center. No, the Russian South would stay on the defensive, allowing the Germans to dictate how the fighting unfolded here. As for the other generals in the room, looking away, Hitler knew what they wanted, namely for Army Group B to pull back for winter quarters, which would allow them to improve their defenses. The question was, who was right? And or what would Stalin do during the coming cold months?
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your sites will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
What Hitler needed was perspective, which he was not open to. How could he be wrong now when he had been right then? But there was another who saw the Battle of Stalingrad in a larger context, and this was retired General Sir Charles Gwynne, a British Army officer. In late October, he was asked to write an article for a British magazine, and though he was not on the ground at Stalingrad, nor did he have access to the German or Russian headquarters, he nailed most of what was happening and what should or would happen if the Germans did not alter their course. And here are a few excerpts. The German must, from a purely military point of view, have begun to doubt whether it is really worth expending men and material in an attempt to complete the capture of the city by assault. He has already achieved a great part of his object, for he has practically destroyed Stalingrad as a center of war industries and has gained a position which enables him to interrupt through traffic on the Volga. If he left an investing force at Stalingrad to maintain the advantage he has already secured, might not he divert the bulk of this striking force to a more worthwhile object? And here he meant sending some of Army Group B to help Army Group A get past the Terek River to enter Grozny. Back to General Gwynne. But would Hitler consent to such moves? The prestige of the Reichswehr, or German armed forces, was deeply committed, and failure to take Stalingrad, coming after failure to capture Leningrad and Moscow, would provide fresh proof that it was not invincible. Now, hindsight allows us to say Gwynne was right. It would have been best, or better, to have left a powerful but smaller force behind and either threaten another area, hold them back for the winter, or help Army Group A. But by now, Hitler had swallowed the Stalingrad pill. Not only did he want it taken, but he wanted it taken as fast as possible. But not because of winter, but to show how easy it was. Further supporting this, a week after Gwynne's article came out, the German propaganda ministry issued the following statement to the foreign press. Stalingrad will be taken. The T in taken was capitalized. Now came another break in Hitler's command structure, or rather the implied threat to a high-ranking officer that would affect the battle in Stalingrad, and not in a way beneficial to the attackers. Hitler, seeing no progress by Army Group A in the south, placed much of the blame for this on Chief of Operational Staff of OKW, General Alfred Jodl. The argument centered around supposed fuel issues and how General List, commander of Army Group A, was fighting. When Jodl got back from visiting List, Hitler shouted at Jodl that List was not fighting the way Hitler wanted him to, which is when Jodl pulled out the attack plans and orders for List to follow. And right there at the bottom was Hitler's signature. Der Führer went white with rage and stormed out. After this latest shouting match, Hitler told his head of the Army Personnel Office, General Rudolf Schmundt, to come up with a list of men to replace Jodl. And the name at the top of that list was General Friedrich Paulus, currently the very officer trying to capture Stalingrad. So Hitler sent Schmundt there to ask Paulus if he would accept the position if it was offered to him. By this point, Paulus had launched his first major offensive into the city, and though he had gained control of some parts of it, his attacks had stalled. He was in the middle of planning his second major attack that would come from the northwest and focus on 3 targets on the northern half of the city, and listing those going from north to south on the western bank of the Volga, the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, the Barkardi gun factory, and the Red October steel factory, which is when Schmundt arrived at Paulus's headquarters. Schmundt put the question to Paulus about the position, The latter said yes, and the former exited to give Hitler the good news. But Hitler wasn't the only one becoming obsessed with taking Stalingrad. Thinking how good it would look on his record to subdue the city just before being promoted, Paulus redoubled his efforts, and he had a new weapon to bring to bear, that being the Dora, one of the most powerful cannons ever built. Its rifled barrel had the largest caliber, 80 centimeters or 31 inches. Its shells weighed 7 tons each. The gun itself was so heavy, 1,350 tons, it had to stay mounted on twin railway lines. Its range was 38 kilometers or 23 miles and could only be fired 14 times a day. But those 14 shells could bring hell to the enemy, or take them there. Yet, as for winning the battle of the streets of Stalingrad, Paulus had looked to the past to help him with the future. The general had been given several specialist engineering units. These were experienced demolition team members and miners. Like the soldiers during the Great War who smashed their way through Allied trenches, these men were put into groups of 12, all carrying submachine guns, except for the last 2. One would have a heavy machine gun, the other a flamethrower, and all 12 would carry as many grenades as they could. Paulus's plan was to not have these stormtroopers hit enemy strong points, but rather they would pierce weaker points and move on, past the enemy's strong points. Soon a new line would be formed with several enemy strong points behind this and thus cut off. Now unable to receive reinforcements or supplies, these isolated Soviet strongpoints would be taken out by traditional means, infantry, artillery, and Stuka dive-bombing attacks, and thus Stalingrad would be gobbled up bit by bit. And to make sure that the battle line moved the way the Germans wanted it to, while the Stuka dive bombers attacked these isolated pockets, other bombers would disrupt enemy supplies trying to reach the front line. And now there was the added might of the Dora. It was a solid plan. Not that General Chuikov knew exactly what Paulus was up to, but the Russian was coming up with his own new tactics. His goal was to wrest the initiative away from the Germans. If he could achieve that, the rest would take care of itself. So, just before Paulus's second major attack got underway, here's some of what Chuikov told his men. Dig your trenches by night and camouflage them by day. As in, the first time the enemy sees you should also be his last time. Back to Chuikov. Each man must have a Tommy gun and 12 grenades. 2 of you get into the house together. You and a grenadier both be lightly dressed. You without your knapsack and the grenadier bare of equipment. Send the grenadier in first, then you after. Go through the whole house. Always, again, the grenadier first into every room and you after. Don't worry, grenadier. A grenade goes into every room first, then follow with a gun. A grenade, then you, again and again. A room, a grenade. A bend in the corridor, a grenade. And always keep moving. The general ended with, act more ruthlessly with your grenade, your gun, your knife, your spade. And there would be much spade work in the immediate future. Next, Chuikov's scouts found that German bombers and artillery crews did not like to attack enemy troops if they were as close as 46 meters or 50 yards to any Germans. The result, the hugging the enemy order was given out for frontline troops. Whenever possible, they were to be within that distance from the enemy at all times. So, for all their power, the Germans just had one of their hands tied behind their back. As will soon be seen, that condition would not hamper the Russians. Another aspect of this growing battle was the use of snipers. Normally, the Soviets would just take the best shot in a unit and make them a sniper. The best ones were given specific rifles with telescopic sights. During the September battles, the Soviet 1047th Rifle Regiment reached Stalingrad, and among those men was one Sergeant Major Vasily Zaitsev, a sniper. But it would be closer to the truth to say he was one of the best at hiding and being patient. He would and could wait for days in a single position for just one shot. His assistant was Nikolai Kulukov, who was always close enough to him to shout out information, but far enough away to have a slightly different angle. These two men would make the invaders' lives hell in the coming future. But let Zaitsev introduce himself. He was in Stalingrad amongst the men of the regiment when his commanding officer approached him. The officer pointed at a German officer about 800 meters or 874 yards away and asked Zaitsev, "Can you hit him?" The man lifted up his standard-issue Mosin Nagant rifle, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The German officer went down. Seconds later, another German came to check on this officer. Zaitsev shot him as well. It was then that the Russian was given an adapted sniper's Mosin with telescopic sight. For the rest of September and most of October, Zaitsev and Kulikov terrorized the frontline Germans. But before October was out, Chuikov would pull these two men aside to have them teach other snipers. And his sniper school was set up in the Luzur Chemical Works, near the northern end of town. But for now, these two men and all of the defenders of Stalingrad would be busy, as on September 27th at 6 a.m., Paulus's second great attack got underway. Having gained much of the southern section of the city and the northern half of Mamayev-Kurgan Hill, it was time to focus on the northern half of Stalingrad overall and the factories therein.
Your data is like gold to hackers. They're selling your passwords, bank details, and private messages. McAfee helps stop them. Secure VPN keeps your online activity private. AI-powered text scam detector spots phishing attempts instantly. And with award-winning antivirus, you get top-tier hacker protection. Plus, you'll get up to $2 million in identity theft coverage, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
Only two of the three large buildings in the north would be Paulus's target at the moment. Again, going from north to south on the western bank of the Volga, there was, for reference, the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, the Barakati gun factory, and the Red October steel factory, which had its own landing area to receive reinforcements from across the Volga. They were all made of steel and concrete, as were the housing units for each factory. So basically, fortresses that had to be taken by the Germans. Now, from the Germans' point of view for their attack on their far left flank, again on the Soviet far right flank at the northern end of town, the 389th Infantry Division. This would go for the suburb of Orlovka, and then for the Barakati gun factory, the middle building listed. Orlovka was where many of these workers lived. To the right of the 389th Infantry was the 24th Panzer Division. Their goal was to take the small airfield just before the city proper and then push in from there. And to the right of the 24th Panzer would be the 100th Jaeger Division of Austrian troops. They were to take control of the housing estate connected to the Red October factory, the southernmost of the three major factories. Per Paulus's plan, the attack started with artillery attacks and Stuka bombardments. Then the infantry of the 389th Division moved out first. The panzers were obviously faster, and as Paulus wanted all three attacks to hit the enemy at the same time, the infantry went out first. As the men of the German 389th Division approached the workers' houses, they were surprised to see hundreds of women and children run out of the closest houses and run towards the enemy's defensive line. But as the German troops were right behind them, the Russian machine gunners opened up. Within minutes, all of those women and children were dead. The Germans were shocked by this, but they still advanced, though less intensely now, seeing such a sight. The reason the machine gunners had opened up was to target the invaders. The civilians just happened to be in the way. But there was no way these men were going to fail Chuikov. The 3 German columns came on. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So we're in the thick of it now, and we're seeing a lot of the political ramifications, and we're starting to see things unravel for the attackers' plans, and that's how it works. It's never just an all-out one go. It's like a pinprick, and then it all caves in on itself, and that's what we're starting to see here. So anyways, so no new members, no donations, but it's only been a couple days since the last episode. I'm not surprised. So anyways, we'll see you soon with the next one. And then I can't wait to get to November, because then we get to bring in a couple of other things. We get to bring in Nazi Germany taking the rest of France. They're taking Vichy France, and also bringing in the Americans in Morocco. Take care, everyone.
As a longtime foreign correspondent, I've worked in lots of places, but nowhere as important to the world as China. I'm Jane Perlez, former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. On Face Off, the US versus China, we'll explore what's critical to this important global relationship. Trump and Xi Jinping, AI, TikTok, and even Hollywood. New episodes of Face Off are available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.